My Thomas Story Library, Stanley. This is a story about Stanley, a powerful engine with a shiny silver funnel. Thomas wanted to be the leader of the tracks, but Stanley showed him that really useful engines work together. One day, when Thomas was exploring, he found the lost town of Great Waterton. The Fat Controller was very pleased. He put Thomas in charge of rebuilding the town before the Sodor Day celebrations. "I'm the leader of the tracks," sang Thomas. Just then, Gordon raced past with a new grey and red engine. He was bigger than Thomas. "I wonder who he is," Thomas thought. When Thomas reached the sheds, he saw that the new engine was already there. "This is Stanley," said the Fat Controller. "He will do Thomas's work while Thomas takes charge at Great Waterton." Stanley blew a puff of steam and smiled. "Stanley looks strong and fast," Gordon told Thomas. "He'll be a really useful engine." But Thomas was too excited about his important new job to worry about Stanley taking his place. The next day, when Thomas went past the washdown, he saw a funny sight. Percy and Stanley were covered in bubbles. "Hello," tooted Thomas. "That looks like fun." But Percy and Stanley were chuckling so much that they didn't even notice Thomas. Thomas felt cross. He wanted to show everyone that he was the most useful engine on Sodor. So later that day, he raced along pulling some heavy trucks to show how strong and fast he was. Then there was trouble. Thomas took a corner too quickly and slipped off the track. The Fat Controller was cross. "Thomas, you must go to the works to be mended," he shouted. "Stanley can take your place at Great Waterton." Once Thomas had been repaired, he sped back to Great Waterton. The Fat Controller said, "Stanley's done well. He'll stay in charge. You can help him, Thomas." Poor Thomas! He had lost his important job and now Stanley had taken his place. Then Thomas had a naughty idea. "If I shunt lots of trucks, Stanley won't be able to pull them all. Then everyone will see he's not so useful and I'll be in charge again." Poor Stanley huffed and puffed, pulling all the trucks up the hill. He wasn't going to give up. Suddenly, a coupling snapped, and the trucks rolled back down the hill. Bang! They crashed into Waterton Tower, knocking it down. "Disaster!" roared the Fat Controller. "Thomas, why did you shunt so many trucks for Stanley?" Thomas felt so ashamed. He couldn't tell the Fat Controller why he had done it. That night, when everyone was asleep, Thomas decided to make up for his naughty trick. He worked all night shunting trucks. By the morning, nearly all the work was done. One truck had been left behind in front of a mine shaft. "I'll fix that," said Thomas. But he biffed the truck too hard and it trundled into the mine. Thomas puffed down the dark tunnel to fetch the truck, but the track was flooded. His wheels slipped and he slid into the darkness. Back in Great Waterton, Stanley asked the engines if they had seen Thomas. No one had. "He looked very sorry when the trucks crashed," said Stanley. "I'm sure he didn't do it on purpose." The Fat Controller was worried. "Everyone must look for Thomas," he boomed. Stanley knew how important Thomas was. "I'll find Thomas and tell him we all miss him," he said to himself. Meanwhile, Thomas was sliding along the flooded mine tracks. Then all of a sudden, the tunnel opened out onto the hillside. "Bust my buffers!" wheezed Thomas as he sped down the hill. He came to a stop beside an old track. Poor Thomas could only wait and whistle for help. "I am silly," he said. "Stanley wasn't trying to take my place. He was just trying to be useful, like me." Stanley searched the hills, but he couldn't find Thomas. It was time to go back to Waterton. He blew his whistle once more, as loudly as he could. Thomas heard him and whistled back. "Thomas!" Stanley said as he chugged towards him. "Where have you been? Did you run away?" "No, I was just trying to be useful," said Thomas, and he told Stanley all about his adventure. "Sorry I played a trick on you, Stanley," peeped Thomas as Stanley heaved him up onto the rails. "Let's be friends," Stanley huffed. Then came a loud crack! Stanley had burst a valve in his boiler. Now he couldn't move. "Don't worry," whistled Thomas. "It's my turn to help you." So puff by puff, Thomas helped Stanley back to Great Waterton. Everyone worked hard to rebuild the tower and finished just in time. Sodor Day had arrived. "Thomas, I want you to bring the mayor to the special celebrations," said the Fat Controller. "Please, sir," tooted Thomas. "Can Stanley do it?" "You can do it together," he replied. "After all, Stanley saved you, and you saved Stanley." So Stanley puffed proudly into Great Waterton with the mayor on board and his new friend Thomas by his side. My Thomas Story Library, Flora. This is a story about Flora, a new steam tram on the island of Sodor. Thomas thought that Toby would be upset if he knew there was another tram engine on my railway, but Flora soon proved how really useful she could be. Thomas and Toby are very good friends. One bright morning, Thomas puffed past Toby's shed. "Hello, Toby," he peeped. "You look happy. The Fat Controller has sent me to lead the parade at the first Great Waterton Festival," Toby wheezed excitedly. Thomas was pleased for his friend. "Everyone will cheer for you, Toby. You're the only steam tram on Sodor," he smiled. Thomas puffed quickly away. The Fat Controller was waiting for him at Great Waterton. When Thomas arrived in Great Waterton, he stopped suddenly in his tracks. "Fizzling fireboxes," he gasped. There, on the road next to the track, was another steam tram. "Thomas," boomed the Fat Controller, "this is Flora. She is the new steam tram on Sodor." Flora smiled happily. "Hello, Thomas," she puffed. Hello," Thomas puffed back. "Flora is to lead the parade with Toby," the Fat Controller said. "Please take her to meet him. Then Toby can bring Flora back here in time for the parade." Flora's crew changed her road wheels for steel railway ones so that she could travel on the track. "Toby thinks he's leading the parade all by himself," he worried quietly. "I must keep Flora away from Toby until after the parade." Thomas knew he would get into trouble with the Fat Controller, but didn't want Toby to be upset. Before long, Thomas and Flora were steaming through the countryside. When they had to stop at a signal, an idea flew into Thomas's funnel. I will take Flora to do one of my jobs before we go see. I will take Flora to do one of my jobs before we go to see Toby," he chuffed to himself. "That way, Toby is sure to have set off to lead the parade." Let's go to the woodyard first, Thomas puffed to Flora. It won't take long. That sounds splendid, Flora smiled sweetly, and she steamed after him. At the woodyard, Thomas collected a flatbed of logs. Now we can go and meet Toby, he chuffed. Flora was pleased. Hooray! She peeped. Toby, Toby, you must go. Hurry now to leave the show, Thomas puffed to himself as they set off. Thomas and Flora soon reached the junction by Toby's shed. The shed looked empty. They were about to go again when Thomas saw steam coming from inside. Cinders and ashes, Thomas wheezed quietly. Toby's still there. He mustn't see Flora. Thomas puffed off as fast as his wheels would carry him. Quickly, Flora, he whistled loudly. I've just remembered. We must go to the quarry first. Flora was surprised. If you say so, Thomas, she chuffed chirpily, and she followed Thomas down a narrow track to the quarry. At the quarry, Thomas coupled up to some slate trucks. Now we can go to meet Toby, he told Flora. Flora was excited. Toby, Toby, please have gone. Leave the show be proud and strong, he puffed to himself. The two engines went back to Toby's shed. This time Thomas was sure it was empty. Suddenly, there was a ding-ding sound. It was Toby's bell. Oh no, thought Thomas. Toby's still inside his shed. He mustn't see Flora. Quickly, Flora, Thomas wheezed. We're late to pick up my load at the docks. Flora was surprised. If you say so, Thomas, she said wearily. And they clickety-clacked back down the track. At the docks, Thomas was coupled up to his large load to take to Great Waterton. Thomas was sure Toby would be leading the parade by now. Come on, Flora, he whistled. Flora's axles ached. Then there was trouble. Flora had chuffed too far and run out of coal. I'm sorry, Thomas, Flora cried. Her wheels wobbled weakly as she came to a stop. Thomas felt sorry. He knew it was his fault. But just then he heard a chuff and a puff and the ding-ding of a bell. It was Toby! Thomas, I've been waiting for you, Toby huffed. Then he saw Flora. Who's that? He gasped. Thomas was worried. Neither of them were at the parade. The Fat Controller would be very cross. Flora, this is Toby. Toby, this is Flora, Thomas puffed bravely. But instead of being upset, Toby smiled. Oh, Thomas, I wanted to tell you that I was too scared to lead the parade all by myself. Now, Flora and I can lead it together. Thomas had to put right his mistake, and quickly. Flora, take some of my coal, Thomas chuffed. I'll collect more from the coal shed. So Thomas's crew took some of his coal and made a good fire in Flora's firebox. Before long, Flora felt much better. Now puff as fast as you can to Great Waterton, Thomas told the two tram engines. Toby and Flora chuffed quickly away. Thomas puffed into Great Waterton just in time to see the flatbed being unloaded. It was a wonderful tram car for Flora. Flora gasped. Toby rang his bell. Ding ding! And Thomas smiled as his two friends set off leading the first ever Great Waterton parade. The children cheered and the brass band boomed. Toby and Flora looked splendid. Now I have two best friends, Thomas peeped, and they are both steam trams. My Thomas Story Library, Colin. This is a story about Colin, a crane who works at the wharf. While everyone gets ready for a party, Colin looks set to spend the night alone, but with good friends to help, he may just get some cheer after all. It was a frosty afternoon on Sodor. Colin was hard at work at the wharf. Colin was a shiny green crane. He had a long arm that was really useful for carrying things. That evening, a party for the children of Sodor was being held in the Thing Controller's garden. His house was near the engine depot, so the engines could enjoy the party too. Colin's friend Freddie was very excited. "There will be presents and fireworks," he said. But Colin didn't look quite so excited. Just then, the Thing Controller cycled into the wharf. "All of these crates must be unloaded before I leave for the party tonight," he told Colin. "You can count on me," Colin replied. "I must go now," said the Thing Controller. "I'll be back later for Freddie to take me to the party." The Thing Controller rode away on his bicycle. "It will be the best party ever," Freddie peeped. Colin still didn't look excited. He couldn't go to the party. He had to stay at the wharf. He didn't have wheels like the engines. "I've never been to a party," Colin sighed. Freddie felt sorry for his friend. Then suddenly, he had an idea. "If I move the party to the wharf," Freddie thought, "Colin can have his first surprise party." Freddie steamed out of the wharf to put his exciting plan into action. Freddie's job was to find the Thing Controller. On the way, he pulled up by Peter, Sam and Rusty. Peter Sam was pulling a flatbed filled with crates. The crates had lots of colourful lights and presents on top. Rusty was pulling another flatbed. It was piled high with boxes of fireworks. "We're taking the cargo to the Thing Controller's house," Rusty told Freddie, "for the party." "The party's now at the wharf," puffed Freddie. "I'll take your flatbeds back there. Will you tow the other engines?" Peter, Sam and Rusty were very surprised, but they agreed to help. By the time Freddie had chuffed back into the wharf with the flatbeds, the snow had settled on the ground. "Please leave this cargo here until Please leave this cargo here until I come back," he told Colin. Colin was puzzled. "Doesn't the Thing Controller need the cargo for his party?" he thought. Later that afternoon, Thomas brought the Thing Controller back to the wharf. When he saw the presents, lights and fireworks, he was very cross. "They should be at my house for the party!" the Thing Controller shouted. "Colin, load them onto the barge!" Colin didn't want Freddie to get into trouble, so he kept quiet. He carefully loaded all of the cargo onto the barge. When he had finished, the barge set off down the canal towards the Thing Controller's house. Freddie steamed all over Sodor. He couldn't find the Thing Controller anywhere. Snow was falling heavily and it was getting late. He still hadn't asked if he could move the party. When Freddie finally spluttered back into the wharf, he was very tired. Colin was waiting for his friend. He told him all about the Thing Controller's visit. "He asked me to send the party cargo down the canal," Colin said. "So it's all done." Colin was very pleased, but Freddie wasn't pleased at all. The children would be arriving at the Thing Controller's house in half an hour. There was nothing for the party there, and there was nothing at the wharf. Freddie felt terrible. "Which way did the barge go?" he asked Colin. Colin pointed his long crane arm down the canal, and Freddie steamed off to find the barge. The thing controller was very cross when Freddy finally pulled up next to him. "Where have you been, Freddy?" he snapped. Freddy told him about his idea to move the party to the wharf. "I'm so sorry, sir," he sniffed. The thing controller was quiet for a few moments. "You should have asked me first," he sighed. "But you can have the party at the wharf." Freddy let out a happy toot. He just hoped he could find the barge before it was too late. By the time Freddy caught up with the barge carrying the party cargo, it was almost dark. "Stop!" he called to the bargeman. "Please turn the barge around and go back to Colin. The party's now at the wharf." The bargeman was very surprised, but he quickly stopped the barge. Then Freddy headed back to find Colin. It was time he told his friend what was going on. When Freddy pulled into the wharf, Colin had just finished his work for the day. "Have I got a story to tell you?" puffed Freddy. He began to tell Colin all about his party plans. Colin was surprised and delighted. "You moved a party for me?" he blushed. "Well, we'd better get to work." The friends quickly hatched a plan. Freddy steamed off to collect the children, while Colin waited for the barge to arrive with the cargo. He had some unloading to do. Colin moved the cargo in record time. When Freddy arrived with the children, everyone gasped. The wharf was filled with presents and lights. Many of the engines were there too. Then suddenly, a loud bang echoed around the wharf. One after another, colourful fireworks shot up into the night sky. "Wow! Thank you so much, Freddy," smiled Colin happily. "I'll never forget my first party." The engines whistled and the children cheered. It was the best party ever. My Thomas Story Library, Hank. This is a story about Hank, a special new engine the size of a giant. At first, the engines thought Hank was too big for his buffers, but when Thomas ran into trouble, they soon learned that Hank had a big heart too. Hank was a brand new engine who had just arrived on Sodor. Hank was very special indeed. He was a very big blue engine with bright red boiler bands. The Fat Controller invited all the engines to come and welcome Hank to the railway. When they saw how big Hank was, they gasped. "Hank looks as strong as a giant," peeped Percy. "I'm sure he isn't stronger than a Sodor engine, though," Thomas puffed proudly. The Fat Controller had a lot of jobs for Thomas to do that day. "First, you must take new machines from the docks to the factory," said the Fat Controller. "Then you are to pick up slates from the quarry and deliver it to the shunting yard. Lastly, you must pick up an old tractor from Farmer McCall's farm and take it to the repair yard." "Yes, sir," peeped Thomas. Hank thought Thomas must be a very important engine to have so many big jobs to do. Hank was pleased when the Fat Controller told Thomas to show Hank all the sights of Sodor. "You must be back by tea time for Hank's welcome party at Tidmouth," the Fat Controller said. "Hank is a very special engine." As Thomas buffered up to the trucks that held the machines for the factory, Hank shoved alongside him. Hank wanted to make friends with Thomas. "Hello there, Thomas," whistled Hank. "You look like the finest little engine I've ever seen." Thomas was not very pleased to be called little. "I'm a tank engine," he huffed. Hank saw all the trucks that Thomas would be pulling. They looked very heavy. "Let me take those trucks for you," shoved Hank helpfully. No, thank you, peeped Thomas. I'm strong enough to pull much heavier loads than this, he said, and he puffed out of the docks. Hank hoped he hadn't hurt Thomas's feelings. Thomas and Hank arrived at the quarry. Hank was surprised. He was sure the Fat Controller had told Thomas to go to the factory first. I'm going to pick up the slate trucks, Thomas huffed. Hank was worried. The slate trucks looked heavy too. Hold your hoofing, Thomas, smiled Hank. Let big old Hank take those trucks for you. No, thank you, puffed Thomas politely. Tank engines can pull very heavy loads. Hank followed Thomas out of the quarry. Thomas was heaving and huffing. Handsome Hank gleamed as he chuffed down the tracks. But poor Thomas was puffing and panting. Hank saw children waving from the bridges. Hello, Thomas, they called. Good to see you, Hank whooshed happily. My, Thomas, aren't you going to whistle hello? But Thomas didn't have quite enough puff. Thomas and Hank slowed at the farm, where Farmer McColl was waiting with the tractor on a flatbed trailer. Thomas was almost out of puff. Hello, Farmer McColl, gasped Thomas. This is Hank, the new engine on Sodor. That's a mighty fine tractor you have, Hank whistled, as it was coupled up to Thomas's trucks. Then he looked at Thomas. Say, you look all puffed out. I'll take the tractor for you. But Thomas did not want any help. Thomas huffed and puffed, but his wheels hardly turned as he tried to pull away. Take the pressure off your pistons, Hank whistled kindly. Gobble me up. But Thomas would not let Hank help him. He struggled on crossly. Thomas and Hank passed through a station. Some visitors waved at Thomas, but Thomas had no spare steam to whistle back at them. So Hank blew a loud, long whistle for them both, which made Thomas even crosser. Suddenly, there was trouble. There was a flash and a fizz, a pop and a twang. The loaded train was too heavy for Thomas. He had cracked a cylinder and couldn't move at all. Oh no, Thomas moaned. Now the deliveries won't be made, and you won't be back in time for your welcome party, Hank. All because I'm not a really useful engine, or even a very strong one. Hank sighed. He was sad for his new friend. I wanted to show you that I wasn't just a fine little engine, Thomas steamed softly. I wanted to show you how strong I am. But I need your help now, please. Hank was delighted to help. You give the orders, I'll do the pushing, he puffed. Hank coupled up to Thomas. With Hank shunting the train, they delivered the tractor to the repair yard together. The workman was sorry to see that Thomas had broken down. Next, Hank and Thomas chucked into the shunting yards to deliver the slate trucks. I hope you're back on track soon, Thomas, called the yard manager as the trucks were uncoupled. Finally, Thomas and Hank delivered the new machines to the factory. Thank you, Thomas, said the factory manager. The engine's work was done. Hank proudly pushed Thomas all the way to Tidmouth. Thomas and Hank arrived just in time for the welcome party. Thank you, Hank, whistled Thomas. Now all of Sodor knows what a strong engine you are. Hank smiled. I know something too, he said kindly. You're the engine everyone cheers for on Sodor. That's really something to be proud of. Thomas was pleased. You are a special engine, he smiled to Hank. And a very special new friend too. My Thomas Story Library, Madge. This is a story about Madge, a snub-nosed lorry with 3 wheels. Madge likes to help the engines on the narrow-gauge railway with their work, but sometimes she forgets she has her own jobs to do. Up in the mountains, there are many railway tracks that the little narrow-gauge engines run on. There are many roads for the cars and lorries too. Madge is a snub-nosed lorry. She drives up and down the mountains and valleys, delivering goods to the villages. Madge is a kind lorry. She likes to take care of everyone she meets, especially the narrow-gauge engines. One morning, Mr. Percival, the thing controller, was telling Madge about a country show and engine rally to be held the next day. Renez and Skarloey were going to lead the rally. The engines must be clean and shiny. You must take them some soap and brushes, the thing controller told Madge. Madge was pleased. I'll deliver them right away, she smiled. Madge had an important job too. She was going to pull the brass band at the show, so she needed to look her best as well. I'll be the cleanest lorry you have ever seen, Madge told the thing controller. She honked her horn proudly and set off for the coal mine. When Madge arrived, Renez was very dirty from pulling trucks of coal. The crew took the soap and brushes and began scrubbing him for the engine rally. Madge stayed to make sure Renez was clean and shiny. Scrub his number and nameplate, she called. She waited until his whistle was washed and his boiler bands were buffed. There, you're almost ready for the rally, Madge smiled. Just remember to wash behind your buffers, she called as she drove away. Madge had to hurry. She drove faster and faster. But the mountain roads were dirty, and mud splashed her paintwork. Oh dear, she thought, I must get back in plenty of time. I have to be washed too. When Madge steered into the quarry, Skarloey was also very dirty from his morning's work. You're real mucky buffers, said Madge. We'll have to work very hard to get you ready for the rally. Soon Skarloey was covered in soapy bubbles. Madge stayed to watch. She wanted to make sure he would be really shiny. Scrub him from funnel to footplate, Madge told the crew. It took a long time, but at last Skarloey was clean. You'll look grand at the engine rally, she called. Just one more thing. Wash behind your buffers! Now Madge really was late, and the mountain roads were long and winding. Madge raced to the village, down more dirt tracks and dusty roads. I hope I can get clean in time, she worried. When she reached the square, Renez and Skarloey had already arrived. Their paintwork gleamed and their domes glistened. You look grand, smiled the thing controller. He was very proud of his little engines. Then he saw Madge. She was filthy. The thing controller was cross. Oh dear, he said. You're very dirty. Don't worry, said Madge. I'll go and get washed and brushed right now. But mud had clogged up Madge's exhaust pipe. Suddenly, with a very loud bang, Madge backfired and sprayed mud all over Renez and Skarloey. Madge saw the brass band arriving. Oh no, she worried. How will we all get clean in time, and I'm the dirtiest of all? We could help, puffed Skarloey. But you're dirty too, Madge moaned. The band is waiting for you, not us, chuffed Renez. Madge gasped. She knew she had to be extra clean and shiny to pull the brass band. It was time for her to get clean. Make sure you clean her wheel axes, Renee said to the crew. And wash her windscreen, Scarloey chaffed. Soon Madge was sparkling. Thank you, she said. Now you have to get clean again too. She was about to tell the engines how to get extra clean and extra shiny. Then she saw what their crews were doing. They were scrubbing the engine's numbers and nameplates, washing whistles, buffing boiler bands, and polishing Renee's and Scarloey from their funnels to their footplates. My, what a wonderful job, laughed Madge. We knew what to do because you helped us before, puffed Renee kindly. Madge smiled. She felt very happy. Soon it was time for the country show and engine rally to begin. Madge sparkled and shone as she proudly pulled the brass band. You both look wonderful, Madge called to Renee and Scarloey. The little engines blew their whistles proudly. Peep, peep! So do you! Madge smiled, but she still wasn't sure whether they had washed behind their buffers.